So, hello everyone, and welcome back to our course, Industrial Metallurgy for NUMPTIES. Let's get right in and see what we hope to learn from this course. So, whom is this course for? Firstly, this course is for anyone who is keen to learn about steelmaking and metallurgy in general, depending on what walks of life you're from. If you're a technician, a trainee, or you're new to the industry, or you may be a material or metallurgy undergraduate student as well, this course is definitely for you. You could also be an industry professional as a process or product metallurgist, then this course is for you. And then finally, if you are a professional and you interface with steel manufacturing companies or other manufacturing companies as well, then this course is definitely for you. I think it's also important to stress that this course is split into two key areas. So the first being IMN 101, which is the level 1 for beginners, where we'll learn about steel making in general, steel casting, steel rolling, and steel finishing processes. And then we've got IMN 201, which is the slightly intermediate or much more advanced level, where we look into heat treatment, various steel microstructures, and future uses of steel components. So two key areas for us to look into, IMN 101 and IMN 201. So let's have a quick look at IMN 101 and what we hope to achieve on completion of IMN 101. So the first being having a proper understanding of various steelmaking processes. So we look at things like BOS, which is the basic oxygen steelmaking process. We look at EAF, which is the electric arc furnace. We look at VAR, which is the vacuum arc remelting process. And we look at things like the blast furnaces and the coke ovens as well. And then next, the second module is around casting and rolling of steel. So we look at things like what are ingots, what are blooms, and how do we calculate this interesting phenomenon, reduction ratios. And then thirdly, we try to understand what are the steel finishing processes, so things like grinding, straightening, turning, and sawing. And then module 4 is around various steel grades. So how can we differentiate amongst the various steel grades? So things like low carbon alloys, stainless steel, pH grades, and CrMos as well. And then lastly, module 5 is around understanding what alloys are and what functions do they perform in steel making. So you're looking at elements and their considerations as well as cost consideration as well. So let's delve a little bit deeper into each of these modules and try to understand what we hope to learn from each of these lessons. So lesson 1, what is steel making? So the first lesson will be around understanding what steel making is, also understanding the process of primary steel making, and then the raw materials used for steel making. And then we look at things like the coke ovens, blast furnaces, the electric arc furnace, which is what we call the EAF, and then the basic oxygen steel making, which is called the BOS. And then we look at vacuum induction melting, which is called VIM, simply called VIM. And then we look at the secondary steel making processes. So quite a number of steel making processes for us to look into in this module. So lesson 2, casting of steel. What do we hope to learn in lesson 2? So first things first, we do a revision on what is steel making. And then we look at steel casting consideration. So what factors do we need to understand or look into whilst casting steel? And then we look at the ingot casting process, specifically the solidification process. And then we look at what we call the concast, which is the continuous casting process. And then we also look at what the typical dimensions are for cast products. And then we examine the typical defects associated with casting of steel. So let's look at lesson 3, which is around the rolling of steel. And as a standard, we do a revision on casting of steel. And then we delve right into steel rolling. What is the rolling process of steel? And what are the various mills associated with steel rolling? So we look at the billet mill. What does this entail? We look at the rail and section mill, which is called RSM in certain spheres. We look at the strip mill, which is used to mill very thin sections. And we look at the plate mill. And then we do a summary of the typical dimensions that you would expect from any of those mills as well. So lesson 3, rolling of steel. So lesson 4, steel finishing. What are steel finishing processes? We'll look at that in this lesson or in this module. So firstly, we look at a revision, so rolling of steel, and then we look at the steel finishing processes. The first process we look at is the turning of steel. What does it entail to turn a bar or a steel material? What does straightening entail? How do we calculate the straightness of a bar? And then we look at grinding of steel, sawing of steel, and then that summarizes the course. So 4 key processes for us to look at: turning, straightening, grinding, and sawing. So lesson 5, which would end this session on IMN 101, is looking at understanding steel grades. So what are the various steel grades? And as a standard, we do a revision on steel finishing processes. And then we look at coding systems. What coding systems do we have available? So we look at the British system, the European system, as well as the American system. And then we look at various steel grades. So we look at carbon steels, for instance, low alloy steels, stainless steels, and why are they called stainless? And then we look at the pH steels, so precipitation hardening steels. And then that summarizes the course. So understanding steel grades and understanding the coding systems. These are part of what we'll learn in lesson 5.